I mean, this is a debate we're in right now in Washington State and at the national level. So you don't believe that someone 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 should be able to get gender hormone therapy without their parents saying, yes, go get it?
No, and I even think like any form of medical consent at 13 is just so like, why are you getting anything? Whether just like aside from anything gender changing, why are you doing anything behind your parents' back at 13? You shouldn't feel the need to, and it just doesn't feel right.
On the show yesterday, and on Sundays with subscribers, we were at a lengthy interview with Frances Stout and Frances's mom, Amy. So Frances took a stand at a recent high school game between Tumwater and Shelton. She was on the Tumwater team. And when she realized, the second she realized during warm-ups that there was a biological boy on the other team, she said, I'm not playing. It was her last game of the year. She said, I'm not playing. And after that, she was still so upset. She took to social media and she posted a lengthy post about it. I won't read the full thing again here, but just sort of as a reminder, one of her key frustrations, she said, I refuse now and forever to compete against any biological male in any sport that I play. She said, I was incredibly distraught at the fact that nobody would step in on our behalf, including staff, coaches, referees, and parents from both sides. This is due to the sheer fact that in our society, we have been pushed to be silent and bow down to the demands to accept what we know to be untrue. And I'm so proud of Frances. She gave an awesome interview and stood her ground and came in here. We talked for about an hour. You can watch that full interview on Sunday's show, and we played a clip of it on the live show yesterday. So behind the scenes of all this, you know, we're talking to Frances and her family. This social media post was being shared quite a bit online. And I ended up reaching out to the father of the trans athlete at the center of this, the Shelton athlete, a biological boy who is a senior at Shelton High School. And I expected, I guess, maybe a statement of some kind. I wanted to be fair. I mean, that's my job. I'm not a journalist anymore, but we try to be fair and tell all sides of a story. And Donnie is the father's name. And we had a great phone conversation. And it was interesting because when I called him, I said, hey, you know, this is Brandi Kruse. Do you know who I am? Or should I explain it? And his first thing he said is, I'm actually a big fan of yours, which you have to understand took me aback a little bit, because here I'm calling the father of a transgender teenager, and I guess in my mind I'm a little judgy and thinking that's not the kind of family that's going to watch my show or be a fan of my show. And I said, you know, can we get a statement maybe from you or your family about this controversy and what's going on? And the next day you messaged me and said, Andi wants to do an interview. So Andi being the transgender teenager. And I said, well, you know, make sure that Andi knows I am vehemently opposed to Andi playing against biological girls. And so Donnie had Andi watch some of my stuff on this issue. I talk a lot on this show about radical gender ideology, and Andi didn't change her mind. So Andi came in, and I say her, I don't know. It's such a confusing situation. So I'm trying to be respectful. I don't believe in the gender fluidity thing, but if it slips, it slips. So Andi and Andi's dad came in here, sat down with us for an hour and a half yesterday. And we talked about the game and the controversy around it and sort of responding to aspects of Frances's interview. But honestly, we talked a lot about how Andi came to identify as transgender, and of course around the general controversy of biological boys competing against girls in girls' sports. So here's a portion of our conversation. Thank you both for being here. Can I start with a few prefaces? Mm-hmm. Good? Andi, you are here because you want to be here.
Yes.
Your dad did not make you be here.
When my dad told me he had a conversation with you, I said first, like, I want an interview. Like, I want the same opportunity she had because I want people to hear my side of this story as well.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me just say, I'm very impressed you're here. You're fully aware of my opinion on this issue, that I do not believe biological boys should be competing against biological girls. Yes. So you're here knowing that that's my opinion on this.
And I knew that, like, going into this, I did my research and I knew that.
Yeah, and for that reason, I think it's awesome that you're here. Donnie, do you have concerns about being here?
No, the only thing I would like to say is I would like people to listen with an open mind.
Okay.
You know, a lot of people are hearing her side. I'd like them to hear our side and hear the facts that we present and just form an opinion from there.
Yeah.
We're not here to convince anybody that boys can really be girls or girls can really be boys. That's not what people, I think, are going to be very surprised what we have to say.
Yeah. I will also say, Andi, you have not asked me to not ask you anything. We haven't taken anything off the table. So I think that's important for people as well. I am not going to treat you like a child. I'm not going to wear kid gloves, and I'm going to ask you what comes to mind. So, okay. I want to start with actually just a sentiment that your dad had there. We're not here to convince people that boys can be girls and girls can be boys. Can I ask you, when did you first start to question whether you were a boy or girl?
Ever since I was a young age, I've always been more into girl things. That's just like how I was, no matter, like I just was never into like monster trucks or anything. Like even at 4 years old, I'd rather pick up Barbie dolls and play with them. It was just something that I don't know, that's just how I've lived my life. It's just how I've always been. Does that make sense? Like just something I've always just drawn more to. Nobody forced it on me. Nobody was like, hey, why don't you try playing with these instead of like your monster trucks?
The actual official transition, so to speak, was, I believe, second grade. Yeah.
Second grade?
Yeah.
Okay. When I was growing up, you had tomboys. You had girls who, I was one of them. I'd be in the mud. I'd be out at the farm doing things, and like people would call me a tomboy. And then you had feminine boys, some of whom have grown up to be gay.
Yeah.
As a dad, couldn't that have just been it? That like, oh, it's a tomboy, or is that just what you thought, or this is my son's very feminine? And
that's actually something I've said to Andi over the years is that, there's nothing wrong with being a boy who likes these things. There's nothing wrong with that. You know who you are, and yeah, that's just something I've said from the time that she was little.
Yeah. So you started a transition in second grade. What in second grade constituted a transition?
It was mainly my mom. She told me, she was like, this is an option for you, and explained it to me, and it was something that I just kind of was like, yeah, like that makes sense. It's so hard to explain.
Well, how old is a second grader?
7.
8 years old. And really with transition, it started with some clothes.
It was just like clothes
growing
and hair.
her hair out, things like that.
In my mind, my response to that is that's indoctrination. I mean, a 7-year-old, I'm sorry, I maybe, I'm out of line here, but saying, hey, you can start to be a girl essentially. You don't feel like that was put into your mind at 7 as opposed to just moving on and being a feminine boy? In
a way, I have thought about that, and I've thought that there's sometimes where I think back and I'm kind of like, oh, that was actually really young. Like, does that make sense?
It does.
It's something that ever since that moment though, like I've never questioned it. Does that make sense? Like even getting into doing my own more education myself, like even in middle school, when I do more research about it, it was something I never like questioned.
Should you question it?
I mean, I have in ways. I've thought more deeply, like, am I really just a gay man? But I think about like being I am a boy. Like there's no way around that. That is biologically forever. And I've thought like that I've never really agreed with it. Like that's not who I am. Like I've always enjoyed, like I enjoy putting on a dress. I enjoy doing my hair. I enjoy doing my makeup.
Your boy in second grade is all of a sudden like wearing dresses and I'm going to be a girl. As a dad, weren't you like, hey, that's too early?
All I really have to say kind of on that, and some of these things are hard to answer.
Yeah.
I just wasn't in a position to be able to question anything. And that's just kind of where I have to leave that because, when we start talking about my family, one thing I've strived to do, I've had custody of my kids for 10 years now. Okay. I've never talked bad about their mom to them. I've never approached things that would potentially poison their relationship.
I respect that.
I think people can jump to some pretty obvious conclusions why a man in the state of Washington was awarded custody of his kids. So from there, really trying to dive in and question things when you have temporary custody orders and so on, you can't do that because the state will take your kids.
So as you go on, I mean, it started, you said, in second grade with just like, hey, dresses or whatever. Have you had any medical or surgical interventions?
No, nothing. No hormones, nothing.
Nothing. And so you said earlier, I am a boy.
This process didn't come without its hard red lines for me. And one of those is the transition or the transgender, the hormones, the surgeries, all that stuff. I wouldn't do it.
You would not ever consent to that?
No.
Did you want any of that?
It was something that, another thing my mom had mentioned to us, and me and my dad did go to a doctor's office, and we did have a conversation with that, and my dad told me that like he wasn't going to let me, which was fine. I really wasn't upset about it because I understood where he was coming from, because those surgeries and those hormones and stuff, they alter your life forever. Yeah. And even today, as I am an adult, is something that even I question if I'll ever do, because I don't feel the need for it. Does that make sense?
Well, this is really, and this is important. You mentioned you just turned 18. So you are a senior in high school. And we'll talk more about that. And I think that's the only reason I'd ask you some of the questions I'm about to ask you. If you were a minor, I probably would not. But you're saying that you know and believe that the hormone therapy alters someone forever. In this state, and I hate to say this, Dad, I'm sure that Andi already knows, you could get hormone therapy without your father's consent. You could have been doing that for 5 years.
Well, and I know that, and my friends have mentioned it to me. They're like, you do know you can do this, and I'm like, but I don't feel a need to. I don't feel. No child should, one, feel the need to go behind their parents' back. Two, it's not right. I think it's an adult's decision. It's a very big and major decision.
So, I mean, this is a debate we're in right now in Washington State and at the national level. So you don't believe that someone 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 should be able to get gender hormone therapy without their parents saying, yes, go get it?
No, and I even think like any form of medical consent at 13 is just so like, why are you getting anything? Whether just like aside from anything gender changing, why are you doing anything behind your parents' back at 13? You shouldn't feel the need to, and it just doesn't feel right to me.
Did you hear that, Senator Jamie Peterson? I'm going to be sending this interview to your office because it's a unique perspective, and you can't come back and say, well, that's a hateful position, because you're living it. If
they are so big on wanting kids to have that option, maybe 17. But even I wouldn't have done it. I would never have done it as a kid in any time.
Yeah.
17, 16, 15, 14, 13. God, no.
You know, the fact that you're an adult now is important, because I believe in liberty above all else. I believe in individual choice and people living their lives in a way that makes them happy. So I have no care or concern for the fact that you want to identify physically as a woman. I mean, you do you, like, live your life and whatever makes you happy. My only hesitancy then is the issue of, I don't believe that kids should be able to consent or even get surgical intervention. Sounds like we're in agreement on that. It's where your desire to live as a woman interferes with other people. And that brings us to athletics.
And like, I will never force my lifestyle down on people's throats, because I wouldn't want it done to me. Like, nobody, like the same for religion. Like, I may not be a religious person, but like, I wouldn't want a religion shoved down my throat, and you wouldn't want the way I live my life down my throat. And like you said about how like you may not use she, her pronouns, at the end of the day, like, I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to shove it down your throat and force you to use it, because I don't live my life that way, and it's wrong, in my opinion, to shove the way you believe down other people's throats.
So that brings me to the obvious question, which is, why are you playing against girls?
And that's something that I've just always done. Like, it's something that ever since I started playing basketball in like 4th grade, it's just always what I've played, and I've never had an issue until this game.
Yeah.
Well, and like, my goal was never to make anybody uncomfortable in any way. And I didn't even realize Frances had an issue until I got yelled at the game. Had I known she had an issue, if she had had a conversation with me before the game or their staff, like, I would have sat out. My last thing I want to do is make anybody uncomfortable. I don't want to take anything from anybody. I don't want to make anybody feel uncomfortable. I just want to play a sports game and have fun, because I do enjoy playing basketball.
Yeah, this is where I think we're going to have a lot of disagreements. I don't believe it should be Frances's responsibility or anyone else's responsibility to come to you and say, we're uncomfortable that you're playing against girls. Do you see how that would be hard for other people to broach that conversation? Do you think the responsibility should be theirs?
Well, maybe not necessarily theirs, but like when I watched Frances' interview,
Yep.
and her mom had mentioned how the school had like a meeting or whatever, like their administration, and they knew there could be concerns with this game. Why weren't we alerted of that? Why didn't I get told that? Because I don't want to, I wasn't there to make anybody uncomfortable. I wasn't like seeking Frances out in any way. I wasn't trying to make her upset in any way. That's the last thing I want to do to anybody. And if me playing is going to make you uncomfortable, then I will sit to the side. And not just Tumwater, any other school. Like if any other player I'm playing against was like, I don't feel comfortable with this, I don't mind sitting out.
Yeah. I think, though, that again puts the onus on them. And this is a state and a reality where, I mean, I was protested by people saying I was transphobe for circulating a petition on parental rights. So this is a scary environment for an adult to speak out about transgender issues, let alone a 15-year-old girl. So aren't you putting them in a position to either have to put themselves out there to speak out about it, or to just sit back and say, well, I'll just put up with it? Donnie, go ahead.
You know, what I'm going to push back on is that these are big adult real world questions, right? That we're now trying to put on an 18-year-old high school senior. And I believe it's a little unfair because, you know, if you want to ask these questions of me who has a more worldly view on things at just being an adult and living life, I understand that, and I'm not going to take away Andy's ability to answer this, but it's one of those things that as parents, isn't it our job also to have tough conversations? If they felt this strongly, which there are some parts of this I don't disagree with, but if somebody would have come and talked to me and said, hey, you know, my daughter feels scared for her safety or whatever it is that they felt, I would have respected their coming to me and talking to me. I would have went and had a conversation with Andi and let her make the decision on how we're going to proceed with this.
Yeah, a few things there. You're living in reality, though. I mean, you voted for Donald Trump. You know that this is one of the most controversial societal issues of the moment. So you know, and I know you're smart enough to know, that there are going to be people who have an issue with Andi playing against
100%.
girls. Yeah.
100%. And the issue with this was never about someone speaking out.
Yeah.
If this Instagram post had stuck to the facts, and they had left out the fact that left out their words that Andi had brutalized someone, and that was only meant to sensationalize and make Andi look like a monster, they wouldn't have heard anything from me.
Yeah,
like
and
nothing.
we'll get to the Instagram post in a moment, but I think it's important to work through this disagreement we're having. I mean, you came here knowing I don't agree with you participating against girls.
And I 100% respect your decision on that. And there's parts where I agree with you, like at the Olympics level, like I don't believe that a biological male should compete against a female. That's
why?
Because of the biological advantages.
But you do understand that you do have a biological advantage. That you're bigger, faster, stronger than a lot of girls your age. So that doesn't bother you to then get on a court with biological girls who have physical differences?
Well, the thing is, like, I've never been that good at basketball.
It's hard to make policies around that, though, because you can't be like, okay, we'll let biological boys compete against girls, but only if they suck.
Well,
you know what I mean?
But this is also where, you know, Andi's not coming here saying, you know, Andi played within the rules, right? Andi went and did
100%.
something that she was allowed to do. And I get that it's easy when I'm doing something to do that, especially as a child and, you know, a young person now, I'm talking about growing up, where you're not thinking of the impacts on so many other people and you just live your life. This is just your existence.
Yeah, there are going to be a lot of parents who watch this who say, as a father and as the adult in this situation, you should not be allowing Andi to play against girls.
Okay, and that's their opinion. You know, one of the things that her and I have talked about quite a bit is a lot of it for me came down to skill, right? If Andi was a failed men's basketball player who decided to go and play for the women's and now, or, you know, the girls at school and now is on varsity and is every game that Andi's playing that they're, you know, scoring 50 points and so on, I could see that. But when you live this life, Andi has lived this way for so long. She's only ever played girls basketball. She's only ever played girls sports. That's it. Okay. And so you've been doing this for so long. I don't know. I don't know how to answer that, because I understand that my actions in some ways conflict with some of my beliefs. But that's life, isn't it? We can't always live to the word of everything that we believe, because I want my child to have a happy home to come into. You know, there have been so many parents who don't agree, but meet and get to know Andi, and it changes their view somewhat, and it reminds them that there's a person attached to each one of these transgender individuals, or whatever group that you dislike or don't agree with.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the phrase dislike is a little unfair. You know, I vehemently disagree with the decision that you've made to play against girls. But I can totally bifurcate that from you as a human being and understand that you're a human being deserving of respect and freedom of choice and all of these things, as long as it's not interfering with other people's freedom of choice and their, you know, for instance, not just the basketball issue. Are you using the girls' locker rooms?
Yes, I am. That's all I've ever used. Like throughout middle school, it's all I've ever used. That junior high, that's what I used. High school. I'm
just going to ask. If I'm crossing boundaries, you let me know. But I know you're here knowing this. You just told me you haven't had surgery, so I know that you're, you know, got all the male parts. Do you see how that might make girls uncomfortable in a locker room? And that doesn't bother you?
Well, and it just like, if someone's uncomfortable, I want them to voice that or say that to a staff member. I've never had issues. Like when I change into the locker room, like I usually will change into a bathroom stall just because like I don't want people staring at me. I'm not looking to stare at anybody. I'm just there to change my clothes and get out of there because I don't want to look like a weirdo. That's not my intentions being in there in any way.
Yeah, but again, you're putting the onus on them to speak up. And I'm sorry, I remember how awkward and quiet I could be in situations. It's hard for a teen to say, like, this makes me uncomfortable, especially knowing the societal implications of that in a state like ours. So I feel like maybe if that's one area where I think you haven't thought it through, and I'll just make that assertion, because I can tell you're very thoughtful and smart, is you're putting a lot of onus on your peers to tell you they have an issue with you being in a locker room with you playing with them. Do you think that's fair?
I don't really know. It's such a complex thing. I just wish that, like, because if I had an issue with anybody, I would tell somebody. I would say something. Like, even when, like, I've had friends who constantly make jokes about how I am. Does that make sense? And I would voice that to them. I was like, I get it. Like, you're trying to be funny. I'm a funny person. I make jokes about it. But when it just keeps going and keeps going and keeps going, like, I'll voice that I'm uncomfortable by it.
Dad, you see what I'm saying?
And I do. And it would be dishonest of me to say otherwise. It's, you know, I actually brought up the bathroom issue to her. You know, I wanted to talk through some of the, you know, I knew this would be a serious interview. I knew there'd be serious questions. And, you know, here's a question we could face. And I said, but in the end, when we don't really know how to answer it, you know, these are things that I recognize that I know Andi. I know this situation right here. So it's easy for me to say, you know, you as an individual aren't posing harm.
Right.
On the other side of that, you know, the state of Washington, you know, where before this wasn't really an issue, there might have been trans people that go in, but it wasn't. It wasn't a big issue. But they passed this law, and now it allows any weirdo who wants to put clothes on to go into a bathroom. I will 100% acknowledge that. But there's also the other part of Andi's 18, and once again, we don't have the answers to all of this. We're still figuring all this out, and I think this will give her something to really ponder more of. But to answer all the questions and, you know, have all the answers for the trans community right now, that's just not something we're prepared to do.
Yeah, because you can't build laws for Andi. We can't say men can't come in here because some of them might be perverts, but Andi's okay because Andi's cool and is not trying to creep anybody out.
And I agree, and that's kind of what I'm trying to acknowledge here is that, you know, I do see it.
In no way my intentions ever or will ever be to go into any bathroom or locker room, guys or girls, in any creepy way, because that's not, I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think you probably are without knowing it. I'm going to be honest with you. There's a lot of people who are very understanding in this state, but there's a lot of people who are afraid to say something. And so I just feel the need to say that on their behalf is you probably are without knowing it. So that is a small part, I will say, of our conversation with Andi Rooks and Andi's dad, Donnie. We have another hour or so that we're going to be airing on Sundays with subscribers this week. A lot of it specifically around what happened at the Tumwater-Shelton High School basketball game. And also we get into what's happening in the state of Washington. One of the things I found fascinating that you heard there, so Donnie is a conservative Trump voter, which is just fascinating as it is. And Andi, you heard there say that Andi says, I don't agree with gender hormone therapy, with surgical interventions, and does not believe that kids 13 plus should be able to make those decisions without parental consent, which Democrats in our state are going to have a meltdown when they hear that. That Andi thinks that's ridiculous. So there are some elements there. It's just a fascinating sort of thought-provoking thing. As I pushed back many times, I don't believe that Andi should be playing against biological girls. I don't believe that for a second. I don't believe Andi should be in the girls' locker room. I was very impressed, I will say, that both of them were willing to sit there and answer my questions and take my pushback, knowing my position on this. So we have a lot more to this interview. One point I want to make, because I think it's fair to make publicly, we had the interview with Frances Stout, the female basketball player who decided to sit out her last game of the year because of Andi's presence there. The one big issue that Donnie said got him as a father so upset by Frances's social media post is this paragraph here, where Frances said, during a Tumwater High School girls basketball game on Friday, a biological male from the Shelton High School opposing team was brutalizing my teammates using his biological advantage to clearly and intentionally overpower high school competition. So Donnie says that's what set him off, to send a series of messages to Frances's mother, some of which he regrets, but it was the brutalized that he really took issue with. And I argued with him in the interview that will air part of it Sunday. It's kind of a matter of opinion. I mean, that was Frances's opinion, that it looked like Andi had brutalized a girl on the court. But that really is what bothered Donnie, is he said it's painting Andi as some sort of monster or whatever it is. I hope that you found that conversation interesting. I absolutely found it a fascinating interview to conduct. Again, if you want to become a subscriber, hear the rest hour or so of it, you can sign up, undividedpod.com, undividedpod.com. It'll be on Sundays with subscribers coming up this Sunday, so check that out.